Yeah, welcome to the Aro Benaiah Show, the podcast where we spotlight builders, doers, and hands-on entrepreneurs shaping the future of work. Today, we'll be diving into the topic most founders avoid until it's too late: selling business the smart way. My guest is Paloma Goggins, business attorney and a consultant and transition coach who help founders prepare their company for sales and navigate what happens after the deal is closed. She's the founder of Nocturnal Legal, and she blend our big law expertise into real world business experience, especially in a family-owned company, from exit planning to negotiation to post-acquisition integration. Paloma brings clarity to a process that's often confused and overwhelming. If you ever wonder how to structure a business so it's resellable, or how to integrate a new acquisition without chaos, this is a conversation you don't want to miss. It's really a pleasure having you on the conversation on the
Of course. No, thank you for having me.
yeah, thank you. So Paloma, what was it like growing up?
That's a loaded question, but I'll try and summarize it.
Yeah.
I grew up in a family that owned and operated businesses my whole life and in many different industries. So, everything from a restaurant, clothing store to pharmacy technology. And so, my parents have always been serial entrepreneurs. And so, growing up, I feel like a lot of our conversations would be about business at the dinner table. And so, naturally, when I decided to go to law school, I found my way into business law and helping other business owners and especially closely held family owned and operated businesses just because they speak my language.
Wow, wow. Amazing, amazing. So growing up inside a family business, how did that shape the way you think about ownership, succession and leadership?
Yeah, I think, generally speaking, a lot of times I feel like, and obviously I'm not speaking for every attorney out there, but sometimes the legal contract drafting when it comes to businesses is sort of disconnected from the ownership or from the outcome from a business perspective. And so, one thing that was really neat to me working with my parents growing up and then also helping them on the legal side once I became an attorney was seeing how the contracts that I helped draft or the deals I helped close, how it impacted our business, right, in the real world. So, getting to see how the language I drafted actually had an impact on daily operations or the success of a deal, right? And so, I think growing up in the business has given me perspective on how to help my clients draft in a way that actually aligns with their intentions.
Wow, wow, amazing. Thanks for actually like sharing that particular insights. Yeah. So at what point did you realize that you actually want to help founders not only run out their company, but to prepare them for their exit?
Yeah. So, I got out of law school and working with businesses kind of became non negotiable, right? Given my background. Finding my way, I mean, I had worked on some cool international business deals, not the sale of a company, meshing together technology, creating synergies between two companies that wanted to grow and build something together. Mergers and acquisitions are kind of just a nice stepping stone to that. And working at various law firms, I gained experience helping businesses either buy or sell. And just for me personally, I find it so exciting. As a founder of a business, your ultimate goal, probably at the end of, your growing and scaling the business, is to get a big check at the end and either start something new or retire after, building your baby and working in it for all your life. And so, in a lot of ways, working with founders and especially in helping them transition or do a succession plan is really ultimately helping them to achieve their lifelong goals. And so, for me, it's a win win.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. So many founders don't think about selling until they are tired. What is the biggest mistake that cost?
I would say when you don't start with the end in mind, one of the biggest concerns and probably issues that you come across is that your contracts aren't easily assignable. And so there are many businesses, there's a lot of ways that you can sell your business, but many businesses sell their assets. And so a lot of times, for whatever reason, the structure is made so that you can essentially assign your contracts at closing, which is really just a fancy way of saying, I'm going to take actually, I'll use my analogy that I like to use with my clients. Technically, when you sell assets in a business, think of it as like two sandboxes. And the sandbox that's full of sand is the business that you're trying to sell. And then the buyer has a sandbox that's empty. And so those are like your two entities, and the sand is all your assets. And so when you sell the assets, you're essentially scooping all of the sand out of your sandbox and putting it into the buyer's sandbox. And so, in a way, when you're making that transition, moving all your sand into the buyer's sandbox, all of your assets, something that can go wrong is that if your contracts aren't easily assignable, which essentially means every contract needs to have the other party provide consent or approval, it can create a nightmare. And so sometimes people will have 50 or more contracts that they need to go get approval to assign them. And so something that you can think of early on as a business owner is thinking about your contracts from an assignability perspective. And, working with an attorney is a good way to start, right? They can audit all of your contracts now, well in advance of when you're going to sell, and make a determination of how you might want to change those contracts either now or in the future.
Wow, wow, amazing. I think they just speak volumes too. Yeah, they should get those things figured out before it just get done or then that. Yeah, I'm tired. Let's say it's business. So what does it truly mean for a business to be exit ready?
I would say exit ready businesses, first and foremost, they have their house in order, right? They have organized processes, they have good standard operating procedures. One thing that I think is a really big problem in a lot of closely held and especially family owned and operated businesses is having the founder be everything to everyone, right? So without the founder, it can be very difficult to step away and have the business still continue operations. And so, one thing I like to do when I work with clients in helping them to prepare for a transition or succession plan is sit in, figure out how the founder is pretty much woven into every fabric of the business and start to unwind him or her from the business so that essentially when they sell, they don't have to be like the one woman or one man band.
Yeah, yeah, that's really amazing. So can you explain more like the difference between selling a business and selling it well?
That's an excellent question because I feel like a lot of anyone can sell a business. Selling it
Yeah.
well is not necessarily always the case, right? I think from a selling perspective, selling it well would be probably not creating any sort of potential red flag for your buyer that adjusts your purchase price. The worst case scenario is you're negotiating the sale of your business and they find something that's not very good or is problematic. And then all of a sudden, they're renegotiating the sales price and you're taking a cut. I would also say selling a business well is I think from a post-closing perspective, there are many businesses that will sell with something written into the contract that allows for an adjustment to the purchase price based on how well the business performs after closing. And when you sell well, you set up the buyer for success post closing so that there's no reason to be concerned or worried about how the business will operate. Because the worst case scenario is, let's say you have a founder that hasn't done their job essentially in making sure that the business can run without them. The new owner steps in, and all of a sudden, they're trying to wear seven hats. They're trying to operate the business, run the business, do all of the things that the old founder was doing. And then at the end of the day, maybe clients start leaving because the business isn't operating as smoothly. And all of a sudden, your purchase price gets adjusted because revenue took a hit after closing. And so I think to your point, selling a business well is one that's set up for success even after you're gone.
Wow, the one that's set up for success. Even after all the real are actually more like gone. I think this is very, very key when it comes to selling. So what are the three most important things business owner must fix before going to the market?
Think get your financials in order. You're not going to want to go to the open market with your business for sale without having your financials in place and organized. You want your financials to tell a story, right? You don't want someone to open up your profit and loss and balance sheets and be like, why are your financials such a mess or why are your financials all over the place, right? Especially if your business has some seasonality, trades, construction companies, they have a lot of seasonality, especially in places where maybe you can't work construction all year round. And so having financials show that you essentially have, massive swings, but that swings always come back is good to reassure the buyer that it's not just going to go away. But also, like, back to the getting your house in order, when you sell your business, the buyer is going to ask to see all of your important contracts. They're going to want to see your financials. They're going to want to see all of your permits, your organizational documents. They're going to dig deep. And so getting your house in order before you go to the open market really means collecting all of those documents and organizing them in a fashion where you can literally hand them over to the buyer for inspection. And you're not, like, in some cases, I had a client last year had 3 team members scanning documents physically at their scanner because they were all just printed and not kept anywhere digitally. So that to me is like the worst case scenario is like you have important team members that should be operating your business, but instead they're at the scanner all day scanning documents. You don't want to do that.
Yeah, wow, amazing. I think when you make reference about getting your finances in order, I think it just speaks volumes, meaning that if any buyer wants to buy your business, they are going to view every single document of how the business has been done over time, and to actually more like being able to check to know whether it's more like just to sell in to get out of trap or just selling more like just to pass it on. And I think it is really amazing, especially for the point you just make reference of. What are some certain things they do differently that could actually possibly reduce the value of or what the company could actually worth when it comes to the buyer perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, things that you could do that could change the valuation of your business right before you go to the open market, right, is things like losing one of your biggest clients. One of the things that we see a lot in some of the smaller trades businesses is they'll have client concentration, which is really just a fancy way of saying we have one big client that contributes a substantial amount of our revenue every year. And if you lose that client, even during negotiations for the deal, you're probably going to lose your buyer in the process because unless you're willing to take a huge pay cut on your purchase price, the revenue of your business has been substantially reduced. And so, generally speaking, I would say for the most part, you have to think about the repercussions of big investments before you go to the open market, big bonus structures for your employees. I see that a lot too. People know that they're going to go to the market and sell their business, and all of a sudden they're increasing everyone's pay. They put things in contracts that say that, certain employees are going to get paid at closing. And buyers will look at the timing of everything and say, you've never once given this employee a bonus in the last 5 years. Why now? So that's something to think about.
Wow, amazing. How do you help business owner protect their team and company culture during a sale?
It's a great question. I would say every owner is concerned about letting their people know that they're selling their business. I think
Yeah.
it's smart to wait to tell them because it could cause mass hysteria, right? People could start leaving or looking for new positions. And in reality, most buyers want your employees to stay on board. And
Yeah.
so having your employees leave before you close is actually pretty detrimental because a buyer expects them to be there to help them run the business after closing. And so keeping the culture, I think part of it is that you have to wait to tell your people. And then when the timing is right, I think this is really true from a succession planning perspective, where someone is transitioning the business to a child or an employee, someone in the family. You're going to have to break the news sooner or later because they're going to notice that your employee or your son or daughter is all of a sudden operating the business instead of you. And so I always tell people, do it like an apprenticeship, right? Even when you're selling to a third party that you don't know, when you finally announce it after closing and as you transition, you can start bringing them into the fold gradually and with thoughtful sort of communication about how this is going to work and how you're not really going anywhere, right? You're going to help with this transition and really just make it so that it's less scary. And I think
Yeah.
that will help ultimately preserve your culture the best.
Amazing, amazing. Thanks for actually like sharing that. Being that, yeah, they should get to be there. Why they see the business moving forward compared to just leaving the system entirely and just more like a child you make reference of transitioning to a new owner. We demand a whole lot of them trying to work smoothly, and you being there and putting them through is very, very key. So for someone acquiring a business for the first time, what is the most important things they must understand?
Great question. I think generally speaking, you've got to know what contracts are critical to the operation of the business. Even if you're buying just the equity and not its assets, right back to that sand little, analogy that I had for us. You've got to know the details of the business. You've got to know who your key employees are. You've got to know what contracts are going to be important so that you can continue operating the business as if you were the owner previously. I think, a lot of people will smooth over the diligence process because it's kind of a pain. It costs additional money if you have your advisors, like your attorney, review the documents that have been provided in diligence. And also, it can slow down the deal if you ask additional questions. But when you're buying a business, the diligence period is your lifeline. It is your way to make sure that what you're buying is true and accurate to what the seller is actually explaining to you. So I always explain it as like, you wouldn't buy a car without knowing its history, right? You want to know, has it had oil changes? Have you done
Yeah.
it the upkeep, right? You don't want to buy a car and then find out that it was flooded and left in the river and then someone pulled it out and sold it to you. So that's what diligence is all about.
Yeah. So true, so true. Being that, yeah, buying the business at first, yeah, knowing the history is very, very key. Being that, well, it's only when you know what went behind the scene, you could actually more like takes being able to walk forward. Being that you have seen what has happened in the past few times, and it's easier to just walk from there. Yeah. So, um, what um what simple system, process, or metrics help a new owner integrate smoothly?
I would say integrating after you buy a business is one of those things that people will take very lightly. If you're buying a business as like a first time business owner, obviously you're not going to be integrating in your existing business, which can be a little bit easier. But the same process kind of applies whether you're integrating into your existing business because you bought like a competitor and you're expanding your market reach, or whether you're just a first time buyer and you're buying a business to operate for the first time. Looking at your processes are so important. I always tell people just because they have things running a certain way doesn't mean that you can't come in and streamline them and make them better or work smarter, not harder. So, integrating and essentially stepping into the shoes of the owner is part learning the systems that they currently have in place, figuring out what the culture is currently, and then deciding kind of where you want to go from there, and then making changes slowly but consciously so that it is either running better or maybe the culture is fixed, right? Not everybody has good culture. So, I always tell people like maybe you get into the business and you find out the employees are, not the type of like the interactions is not the culture that you want in your business. It's not impossible to change your culture. It can be difficult, but there is a method to the madness and you can't just like flip a switch and expect everyone to just be different.
Yeah, so true. I think there's a whole lot to learn in here, and I'm glad that you're just giving a whole lot of blueprint to it and how one could actually more like, yes, acquire business rightly, and how to actually more like work on it smoothly without, yeah, getting to know what is in first before they even get to innovate or rework on that particular stuff. And I think it's very, very key. So, how do you help founders emotionally prepare for letting go of a business debut?
It is such a tough thing for owners to do. There is so much identity in your work and
Yeah.
working for a living. I find that it is easier to work with individuals who are just shifting and changing gears and planning to work or own another business than it is for someone who's retiring and they maybe don't have a full vision of what they want to do afterwards. I would say one of the things that we like to do is sit down and have more than one conversation, but essentially have a number of conversations that center around what does this successful closing look like for you? What does after closing look like? Do you want to be a part of the transition and for how long? There are some owners that when they sell their business, they didn't think much about how they signed up for 1 year to help the business continue to operate. And for some of them, they don't want that. They want to be done. They want to go golfing. They want to go on vacation, right? And so I think sitting down and having some of these tough conversations about, okay, let's envision what this looks like, and then let's align what we have currently so that you are living the reality that you want after the business sells.
Oh, wow, wow, amazing. I'm just imagining what that process would be, especially for those retiring after building their business for a majority part of their years. It can be so much demanding to detach from it, being that their whole life is in line and everything. Finally,
Totally.
what is your best advice for small business owner and family business who want to build something sellable, even if they are not ready yet to exit?
I think this is an amazing question. I think to your point, the buildup, right? The buildup is super important. What we've kind of talked about where let's plan. I always tell people 1 year is the absolute minimum. And even with 1 year in advance, you're rushing around. People think that they'll make the time while they're operating their business. And the reality is your business is your baby and it is going to come first, right? Preparing for a sale that's not on the horizon. People usually don't have that fire under them, right? There's no this like impending deadline. And so I would say the optimal time frame for preparation is probably somewhere between 3 and 8 years, with 3 to 5 probably being the best. And during that time frame, I would say the best thing to prepare is get your house in order, right? Work with your advisors, tell some of the people in your circle, right? Tell your accountant, tell your financial advisor. If you don't have a business attorney or you have a business attorney that maybe doesn't do merger and acquisition work, start working with someone that can help you start kind of seeing the vision and creating a plan on paper and then holding you accountable, because at the end of the day, and I know it too personally, when you've got stuff that doesn't make you money, that stuff gets put at the very bottom, right? And
Yeah.
so you've got to have good accountability partners and also advisors that are on notice that things are going to change and they're going to have to start planning for something different for you.
Wow, amazing, amazing. Yeah, thanks a whole lot for sharing with us how Paloma. They actually started out as solopreneur and they were able to kind of work out the system around it. And sometimes it can get so overwhelming that they don't even think about the exit plan. They don't even think about being sellable. And when they want to do that, not they are not being caught in surprise that, oh, they have to be on that a lot of business that actually speak well, sell in a way that at the end of the day they could look back and see that their business is still thriving without them, not it going down. I'm glad that you really give us a whole lot of balance to this particular topic. Yeah, thank you. So, Paloma, how can my audience reach out to you? How can they connect with you? And how can they do business with you? Where is the best platform to do this?
Yes. So my law firm's name is Nocturnal Legal. We provide help with selling and buying businesses at the transaction level. And then we also provide consulting work in helping to provide for transition or post closing integration. You can visit our website at nocturnallegal.com or give us a call at
Oh, wow. Amazing. Amazing. Thanks a whole lot. And definitely, I'm going to add out the link to the website to the show notes. Yeah, Polymatha, thank you for bringing such much clarity, strategy, and honesty to this conversation. Preparing your business for sale, integrating new acquisition, and navigating the emotional side of ownership. These are topics many founders avoid, but today you made it accessible and practical. Yeah, to everyone listening, if you want to learn more about the work of with Polymer, visit polymagoggin.com or look at her podcast at Major, she wrote. And okay, and also thank you for listening out to the Aro Benaiah Show, where we spotlight the builders, the grinders, and the hands-on entrepreneurs shaping the future. Until next time, keep building, keep learning, and keep taking the bold step. Once again, it's really a pleasure having you on the show, Paloma.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you.